The Kursk offensive inside Russia has been a morale boost for Ukrainians used to bad news on their side of the border.
The situation was uncertain, it was hard to watch, it was protracted, and it dragged on. We don't know what this will lead to, but we all have our hopes high. It seems like a courageous and important step, especially to keep up morale.
This will change the situation in our favor. The question is how much, but I hope it will be felt, compared to what else happened in this war.
Kyiv's defense ministry says that both the Ukrainian Air Force and precision US-manufactured HIMARS rockets have destroyed most of the bridges across the same river in the Kursk region. That's aimed at cutting off supplies to Russian forces, all but trapped on the near side of the river. The destruction of the bridges is part of Ukraine's successful strategy to be able to deny Russia its supply lines. But back in Ukraine, the situation isn't nearly as bright, as Ukrainian defenders are very much on the defensive. The fighting in the east near Pokrovsk has intensified. Ukrainian units are slowly being pushed back as the Russian army steadily advances. The town is vital for supplying Ukrainian troops and for controlling the Donetsk region.
It will certainly be a pity if we have to completely conditionally surrender the Donetsk region. We have been dying for it for several years now.
With Pokrovsk such an important prize for Russia, fighting is set to intensify in the coming days. Alex Kotopoulos, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
Let's take this on with Glenn Diesen, who's a professor of international relations at the University of South East Norway. Joins us now from Oslo. Mr. Diesen, welcome to Al Jazeera. Good to have you with us. This Ukrainian push clearly took Russia by surprise. How difficult do you think it will be for Russia to stabilise this front now?
I think it's going to be a great surprise. I've seen some speculation whether or not this was a trap set by the Russians, but this is not correct. They were taken by surprise and they're having huge difficulties in terms of controlling the situation. That is, there were hardly any troops in that region, so it will take time for them to stabilize the front and push back the Ukrainians. From Chechnya, we now see that further troops are being prepared, but Russia's also been reluctant to divert too many troops from other front lines, as this was obviously part of the objective of the Ukrainians. But at the moment, it's seen as a situation which can be managed. That is, that Russia is able to exhaust or destroy a lot of the Ukrainian troops which enters Russia. And so at the moment, it seems as being manageable, at least.
Of course, these are high-quality Ukrainian troops too, aren't they?
Yeah, and this is the problem. It's a war of attrition in which the main objective is to exhaust the adversary. So I guess the problem is that in such a war, you want to make sure that the other guy loses more men and equipment than you, very simply put. So if you acquire territory which doesn't have clear strategic significance, and you spend all of your best troops and all your best NATO equipment to achieve this, it might end up being a loss, even though it seems very optimistic that one gets to take a lot of territory. But again, in that war of attrition, the main important thing of taking territory is to disrupt logistics and get better attrition rates. Now, they might be able to achieve this with the Russians, against Russians, that is. So it still remains to be seen what Ukraine and NATO will achieve with this invasion of Russian territory.
OK, last bit on this element. Russian media have said that the Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered his troops to remove Ukrainian forces from the region by the 1st of October. Do you think that's doable?
It could be, but of course it depends on other variables. It depends how the Ukrainians will react as well, because I think it's become almost a conflict who blinks first, because the Ukrainians sent all their best troops and all their best equipment into Kursk, where they're being knocked out in huge numbers. They left a lot of the other front lines empty. So you mentioned Pokrovsk before. This is a very important front line. This is a key transportation hub to control Donbass. And at Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians have very well fortified multi-layer defensive lines. So it would be very expensive in terms of equipment and men for Russia to break through, because once they break through, the Ukrainians can simply retreat to the next line. Right. However, given that all of their best troops and weapons are now in Kursk, the Russians are just plowing through. So the Ukrainians might have to divert some troops on their own.
Right. And finally, sir, we had these overnight drone strikes in the skies around Moscow. It must be very troubling for the population there.
Yes, it is. This is definitely bringing the war into Russia has caused a lot of stress. I noticed in the Western media there's a huge obsession that this will reduce trust in Putin and we're going to humiliate Putin. But I think actually the opposite from what I'm hearing is happening. That is that this war has now shifted from a special military operation to effectively a war of national liberation, they see. So this is actually bringing a lot of Russians together. They're donating more money. More people are lining up as volunteers. So it's, again, as many have recognized, this is a very risky invasion by Ukraine and NATO. So the consequences have not been seen yet. So it really can go a bit either way. But at the moment, it looks like Ukraine might pay a very heavy price for very unclear gains.
OK, well, let's see how it all pans out. Glenn Deason, for the time being, thank you very much for your perspective.
My pleasure.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.